Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my Week 10 Top 25 review. Not much to say. Let's just get straight into this thing. San Diego State at Boise State. Um, Not really anything to say about this game either. Went about as expected. There is one little human I would like to say something about. And I think one or two of you might know his name, maybe even three of you. Ashton Jeanty is getting all this ruckus and Heisman talk right now for Boise State. And I just want to say he had 31 carries for 149 yards and 2 touchdowns, as well as he had 2 receptions for 31 yards. It took him pretty much all game, like when the game was already over, he was still on the field for some odd reason. You know, Boise State is up 35-10, and in the third quarter, he scores his only 2 touchdowns to go up 42 and then 49-10. That he's still on the field for some odd reason at that point. Almost like it's stat padding, but whatever. All right. And it took him 31 carries to put up 149 yards. Now hear me out. There's just another little running back out there. No one special, not in particular, at least not to me, but Cameron Scadaboo of Arizona State University. I don't have any correlation with this guy, but I just want to say he had 23 carries for 153 yards and a touchdown, as well as 4 receptions for 121 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was closing in on 300 total yards of offense, and he didn't even finish out the rest of the fourth quarter. He even had touchdowns taken away from him, sort of. Plays that he put his team right up on the red zone, in which he was pulled out to get a breather and the backup scored touchdowns. I just want to say, that's all I'm saying, is Cameron Scadaboo had a much better game against a arguably much tougher opponent than Boise State had. That's all I'm saying. All I'm saying is I think Ashton Jeanty has kind of been getting away with a little bit of stat padding, and he also doesn't play very much competition. Boise State's only loss is to Oregon, which ironically is competition. Yes, it was close. That was also when Oregon was struggling to put things together, and since then has turned into a much better all-around team. I'm just saying, I don't think Ashton Jeanty should win the Heisman at all. I think it should be Cam Ward. Even if Cam Scadaboo had a good game and I'm an ASC fan, I don't think he should win the Heisman. Although if he would stay a year, I think he could maybe win it the next year, but his time is up. I think there is a quarterback in Miami that is performing at a much higher rate than Ashton Jeanty, and I also think there's other running backs out there. Even the running back for Iowa is performing at an elite level. It's just because this running back is breaking records against absolutely hideous opponents that everybody is freaking out right now, always on this dude's meat. And you look at somebody like Cameron Scadaboo, who is in the same category as Ashton Jeanty, a very physical runner who breaks tackles and gets a lot of yards after tackles. Cameron Scadaboo has been, other than yards and touchdowns, has been outperforming him. I mean, he gets more yards off of broken tackles, and he gets more broken tackles. He gets out of more broken tackles. And he also plays Power 4 competition. Now, it is Big 12 opponents, but still, and outside of it, he played the worst team in the SEC, but still, you look at who Boise State has played in outside of Oregon, it's empty, and maybe UNLV, but still, like Utah State, San Diego State, these teams are not that good this year. I'm just saying. I really, 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 really hope Ashton Jeanty doesn't win the Heisman unless he puts up 300 yards, 300-plus yards in these last games, every single game. If he does something phenomenal like that, then we could, be like, okay, well, this guy's putting up 300 yards, but it's taking him 30-plus carries to put up 100-something yards. And it's like, okay, if you're going to force the ball down your running back's throat like that, then yes, he's going to have a good game. I mean, against UNLV, 33 carries for 128 yards. Like, okay, he carried the ball 33 times. And then, of course, against Hawaii, he has a good game. Let's check the Utah State game. Against Utah State, he had 13 carries for 186 yards. That game was a damn blowout. And quite frankly, Utah State has a terrible defense. Against Washington State, 26 carries for 259 yards. That game was also a blowout. Against Portland State, 11 carries for 127 yards. That game was also a blowout. The best game he had was against Oregon, but this was an Oregon team that was struggling to find their identity and was struggling to keep up with teams they were playing. They also struggled the week before against Idaho. And since then, they haven't lost the game, and they have performed so much better than they did in that Boise State game. And then Boise State against Georgia Southern, 267 yards and 20 carries and 6 touchdowns. That was his big-name game. But, again, it was a shootout, 56-45. I'm just saying. They're not really playing tough competition outside of Oregon. Like, the teams are not anything special, and Ashton Jeanty is it's not that he's necessarily struggling, but he's not performing at a Heisman level, even though his competition is so much easier. I think the Heisman should go to Cam Ward this year. I really do, unless, Cam Ward gets hurt or he starts to look like absolute horseshit. Miami will most likely go undefeated until the ACC championship and might even go undefeated into the postseason, depending on who they play in the ACC championship. But there's only one game on the schedule that could look like a loss at this point, or I guess maybe two, but it's at Georgia Tech or at Syracuse. Outside of those two games, it's not really like, there's nobody else really on Miami's schedule that poses a threat. Miami has taken care of all the competition. I mean, it looks like it's SMU that's going to be meeting them in the ACC championship, so we'll see what happens there. SMU is up to number 13. That's pretty crazy, but whatever. Let's move on from this game now. Sorry about the yap session, but I just really thought I should mention at least Cam Scatterby compared to Ashton Jeanty, because Cam Scatterby had an absolutely ridiculous game against Oklahoma State, especially after not only after, he also performed in the first half very well, but after like a 3-hour delay to rain, he came back out into the game and picked up right where he left off and put the game away. I was not expecting ASU to do that, and it's all due to Cam Scatterby. Ohio State at Penn State. I made a video on this at halftime, at the end of the game. I was truly, completely, and utterly disgusted with this game, and that was hideous coaching at the end. What a god-awful play call. What a series of terrible play calls. I mean, just throw 3 runs right down the gut against one of the best defensive lines in the country. And then on 4th and goal, instead of trying to mix up the run, go to the outside, or have Drew Aller run it, you do some shitty pass play that was just poorly designed. It's like, if you didn't waste those 3 downs just running it straight into a brick wall, maybe you guys would have stood a chance at maybe tying it. And also, they did kind of get screwed over by that pass being called a incompletion rather than a fumble. That was absolutely a fumble. The running back caught that thing and tucked it into his arm, and then it popped out. And I don't care how long he held on to the ball. He tucked it into his arm. That should be an indicator of possession. And they ruled that an incomplete pass, which ultimately gave Ohio State the 3 to put them up 7. Penn State could have won this game, but quite frankly, I don't care how much went against them. They had their opportunity there at the end thanks to a great play by 44, and they blew it. Mainly the coaches blew it. I think that was just awful play calling, and Penn State deserves to lose this game. And again, their coach can't win the big game, and I think Penn State's got to look to a new head coach. Your Penn State football, there's going to be coaches out there that are going to want to take your spot. Like you could get some of the best to go to Penn State, but this guy, it's just not working out. It's just not working out. He can't win the big game, and it's really killing Penn State. It's killing them because if you win this game, you look at a Big Ten championship appearance and potentially, your time to shine in the college football playoff. Now I think you can still get into the college football playoff. I think there's still away because you win out the rest of the year, you're only a one-loss team. But there is also the argument that outside of Ohio State, they haven't really played anybody. And yeah, they played USC and maybe Illinois, except I don't think Illinois is in the top 25 anymore. And USC is definitely not in the top 25. So now those teams aren't even ranked anymore. So Penn State has only one ranked game on their schedule, and they lost in the big games. So there could be the argument that Penn State hasn't really played anybody this year. And I don't care if it's because of how many teams are in the conference. Maybe that should be a reason why we dim their damn conference down and shave it. Get some teams out of there. But I don't know. This game made me livid. This game made me pissed. Yeah, that's all. Duke at Miami. Finally get to talk about Cam Ward. Continuing the conversation in which I was talking about Ashton Jeanty being a little ball sack and shouldn't win the Heisman. Cam Ward had a fantastic game. Aside from the pretty interesting, prepare for mic noise. Aside from the pretty interesting interception that he threw across his body, trying to keep the play alive, and the Duke player jumped in front and picked it off. Aside from that, he looked freaking fantabulous in this game. 25 for 41, 400 yards, and 5 touchdowns and 1 interception. And a lot of those points came in the fourth quarter, in which the game was still 31-32 Miami. Like, with 12 minutes and 56 seconds left, Miami scored a big touchdown and to go up 8 points. Then a 66-yard pass from Cam Ward. He was slinging it again in pressure. Like, he performs when the games are close. And a lot of this is because of his defense. His defense couldn't hold Duke. I mean, Malik Murphy is a good quarterback, although he had 3 interceptions. The defense couldn't hold this Duke offense to any points. They couldn't stop them until the fourth quarter. That was where their defense finally decided to lock up, and Malik Murphy was starting to throw a lot of interceptions, and it quite frankly was just we knew Duke wasn't going to be that good going into this game. Duke hasn't really played anybody other than SMU, in which they played him tough, but you can thank home field for that. When you're Miami and 526 yards is your total amount of yards on offense, and 400 of those are coming from your offense or from your quarterback's arm alone. I mean, he had 1 extra yard on the floor, but he does have a run ability. When you look at a quarterback performing at a level like this, to where if your defense is kind of being a little bad, it doesn't necessarily matter that much because your offense is just getting it done on the other side of the ball. I mean, every single game for Miami this year has been extremely high scoring outside of the Florida State game, in which Miami still put down 36. That was the lowest scoring game this year for Miami, was against Florida State. They scored 36. The highest scoring game this year was against Ball State. It was 62-0. Against the highest scoring game this year of a Power 4 opponent was this game. It was this game against Duke. And this game was close, and it just shows that Cam Ward is able to get it done. Sorry, I'll just show you guys my prediction. I said Miami would win pretty big. They won pretty big. It took all game, and it was competitive. Miami games have been very competitive this year, but they keep on prevailing, and I think that's just something that is super underrated about Miami right now. You can question their defense all you want, and you have an absolute right to, but when your team is resilient like this, that is something that is super, super, super important, because that'll matter in the big games. If you can keep that resiliency and that performance when it matters the most and not make mistakes, that's huge. I mean, you got to give credit to Cam Ward in Miami in that Cal game for keeping composure and coming all the way back against Cal. Even though Cal might not be near the top 25, they were down huge in that game, and the momentum was completely in Cal's favor, and they ripped it from their palms. And that's just because of Cam Ward's ability to stay composed. That's his veteran ability. Like, he should win the Heisman. If we had to give the award out right now, he really should win the Heisman. And I hope he wins it at the end of the year. Because going from a no star to a quarterback that is leading Miami to this good of a season, you got to give the kid credit. And you just got to give him the Heisman, man. Ole Miss at Arkansas. Yeah, this game felt like an easy game to pick as an upset. And I was expecting a really defensive game. With both of these teams making a lot of mistakes, because that was kind of how it's been. Both of these teams, or at least that's how the Tennessee game was. And even Ole Miss has had their fair share of fairly defensive games. But I guess these teams decided they didn't want to play any defense. 63-31 was the final score. At one point, it was 49-17, even 42-10. Ole Miss absolutely dominated this game. Jackson Dart on the other side of the Heisman race, he looked like a Heisman candidate as well. I mean, you go on the road to Arkansas and you go 25 for 31, 515 yards, and 6 touchdowns. Dude looked like there was nothing in his way. It looked like there was absolutely nothing stopping this quarterback. And, yeah, like that's pretty much all there is to it this game. There was just absolutely zero defense by either team. Arkansas still scored 31 points and had 500 yards of offense, even though a lot of that might have came in the second half when the game is relatively over. You know, they still had 500 yards of offense, which is just no defense. Both teams had almost 100 yards of penalties. It was just Arkansas was turning the ball over. One of them was fumble return to the end zone. So I guess that's some defense there for Ole Miss, or at least for both teams. But yeah, this game was just an absolute freaking shootout. I wish this was like an NFL game and I had some fantasy players in this, because my goodness. Air Force at Army. I was wondering why this game was so low scoring, and I predicted a really high-scoring one. I didn't know that Army's guy was out. So basically, Army is undefeated right now, just like how Navy was. But the reason why this one was so low-scoring was because they were playing this guy, Dwayne Coleman. Yeah, Dwayne Coleman. And he didn't really pass the ball that much. He was more running the ball on the floor, but the running back also did great for Army. But still, when you're getting 3 interceptions from Air Force, and you're only putting up 20 points on offense. And then I scroll back here a game to East Carolina, and I see this guy, Bryson Daly, who was 7 for 10 over the air, 147 yards at a touchdown, but 31 carries on the floor, 171 yards, and 5 touchdowns. That's the quarterback running like that. And then on the other side of things, you've got the same running back, Kanye Udo, I think that's how you say that, 19 carries and 102 yards. So we've got another military school that is all about the run game. And now that this Bryson Daly guy is out, from what it looks like, can we expect this team to continue to perform? I don't know, but if Army can go undefeated, this quarterback, Bryson Daly, could totally be the Heisman. He's got 26 total touchdowns on the year, 1,500 total yards, both in the air on the floor. I mean, you got to give the kid, Bryson Daly, you got to give him some major credit. But in terms, they've got to go on the road to North Texas. If this Bryson Daly guy isn't healthy, I think that could be a loss. But who knows what he was out with. Minnesota, Illinois. I was wrong. I thought it was kind of ridiculous that Minnesota was favored by 3. I thought Illinois would win a close defensive one. They just lost a close defensive one. And Illinois has performed like this a lot this year, where they just make terrible mistakes and it ends up beating them. Like, to start the game, you fumble the ball away. Like, after literally one play, you just fumble the ball, the quarterback as well, and you let that momentum carry into Minnesota, which lets them kick a field goal. And then also right before halftime, you kick a 55-yard field goal. Okay, it's pretty damn far, but you miss it. So those are two big game changers. And when Minnesota made mistakes, you capitalized on it, but you had your opportunity. Minnesota didn't get the 2-point conversion. It's 22-17, and they choose, with 5 minutes and 14 seconds left on the clock, they choose to go for a 4th and 4 on their own 31, which they don't get, which ends up leading to 4 plays, 3 yards, and a field goal for Minnesota, which makes it 8 points. You get the ball back and you're driving. You're down at the Minnesota 16, and you can score and maybe get the 2-point conversion, but you fumble it. So, okay, Minnesota was favored, and yeah, they won by 8, but come on. Illinois really was the team that beat themselves down. Just neither of these teams should be ranked. That's just a simple solution. Neither of these teams are top 25 worthy. It's two shitballs fighting each other. Oregon and Michigan. I guess I had a pretty damn good prediction on this one. Oregon is really settling in. Ever since that start of the year, I mean, they dropped all the way down to number 9. They just looked so bad at the start of the year. A close competitive game against Idaho and a really, really close butt clincher against Boise State. They dropped all the way down to number 9 before they just climbed their way back up to number 3, and then they ultimately beat Ohio State, and now they're number 1, and I don't think they're going to be dethroned. There's only 2 games left on the schedule, at Wisconsin and at Washington. That could be problems. Hosting Maryland, I don't got a doubt in my mind that Maryland's losing that game. But at Wisconsin could be interesting. And, of course, a rivalry game is always a rivalry game. But still, I mean, Oregon on the road has been spectacular. Oregon at home has been spectacular. So they're number 1. It's kind of surreal to look at it, but they're just number 1. I was only off by 3 points on this prediction. I said 38-14. It was 38-17. So that's a pretty cool prediction. Florida at Georgia. Florida has also turned around since the start of the year. I said Georgia would stomp this team. And, I mean, they did win by 14, but it took all game to do that. And I will tell you this much. Carson Beck is killing his draft stock. And as long as Carson Beck continues to perform like this, I do not see Georgia winning the SEC championship. I don't see them winning the SEC championship. You have to go on the road to Ole Miss, who is looking for an opportunity to get back up into the polls and make their name known again. And then after that, you have to host a super defensive Tennessee team. If Carson Beck continues to perform this poorly offensively, then I just don't see this team, I just don't see them having that good of a off season. I don't see how they're going to have a good postseason. Florida, on the other hand, since their hideous start to the year against Miami, in which they got killed in their home stadium and then got beat up pretty good by Texas A&M, they actually start to look pretty good. An overtime loss at Tennessee, a super close competitive game against Georgia. Even up ahead, you got Texas A&M, Florida, which I guess it was 33-7. Sorry for that. Sorry for that noise. It looks like they've either made some changes or they that's probably what it is they made some changes, because when you're dominating a Kentucky team 20-48 and making a Kentucky team look like no defense, that's really impressive stuff, because Kentucky, even though they're 3-6, played Georgia to a 1-point game, went on the road and beat Ole Miss, and just gave Tennessee a very, very tough game last night. They have to go on the road to Texas. They'll probably get hurt up in that one, but they get to host LSU and they get to host Florida. Those are 2 very big games for Florida. And I could see them winning that game and maybe getting bowl eligible, but I don't know. Florida's definitely made some proper adjustments, and maybe it's not time for their head coach quite yet. I don't know if they have already fired him or not, though. But if he is still there, maybe it's not his time quite yet. Maybe just give him a little bit longer. Texas Tech at Iowa State. This was the biggest upset of the week for me. This was unheard of, and this looks really good on ASU, might I just say. Texas Tech, I did not think they were going to win this one. I didn't even really give them hope because, one, I thought their starting quarterback was hurt, and two, Texas Tech just lost 2 back-to-back games, and games they should be winning. I mean, hosting Baylor's pretty good, but it's in your home stadium. You need to win that, and you got killed. You lost by 24 points, and then on the road to TCU, a game in which you were up 31-14. You let TCU, you were up even 34-21 in the fourth quarter. You let TCU climb all the way back in, and you had 5 minutes to at least put up 1 point. You can do it. I was starting to lose my faith in Texas Tech as a football team, but then they turn around and hit the road against Iowa State. Their last opportunity, really, like their last big opportunity, they get Colorado, but their last really big opportunity to make their name known, and they don't disappoint. They hit Iowa State with the first loss of the season, and it was a hard-fought game. It was a really, really solid game. Iowa State is a good football team, but Texas Tech prevailed. Texas Tech gets to host Colorado. Colorado's favored by 3, but I can assure you fans are going to show up to that Colorado game. And then the last 2 games of the year for Texas Tech are easy. You could be looking at a 3-loss Texas Tech team. And for whatever reason, this team is not even close to touching the top 25. Vanderbilt is back in the top 25, which I think is not the worst, but I do think it's kind of interesting considering they had a 10-point win against Auburn. Louisville deserves it, but teams like Pitt and Kansas State Pitt lost their first real opponent. They got killed, and Kansas State lost to Houston. So I don't want to do too many spoilers, but it's like, why are teams like that still in the top 25? South Carolina, Texas Tech had great weeks and are just disregarded. Indiana, Michigan State, I called for a close game. It was looking like it was going to be a close game at the start. Michigan State got up 10-0. That changed really quickly, and Indiana just absolutely stomped the door. They just slammed the door shut on Michigan State, and it went from 10-0 to 47 unanswered points. Kansas State at Houston. The only reason I even turned on this game was because I was trying to figure out how to get ASU back on after their 3-hour weather delay, and I got to witness one of the greatest games, and I said this one will be close. I gave Houston the benefit of the doubt that they have played competitive in specific games this year, and they do have an impressive win against TCU, who TCU looks pretty good in the Big 12 right now, and it was at TCU. So I gave Houston the benefit of the doubt. They've played teams competitively, and they're maybe not as bad as their record says, and I should have just gone all the way with it because they pulled off the upset. Quite crazy if you ask me. I think the money line was 9.5 Kansas State. They had a lot of faith in this Kansas State team. But, I mean, Kansas State had 100 more yards of offense than Houston. They just had more penalty yards and more turnovers. But, I mean, it still was a close and competitive game. Even from what it looks like, at least in the first half, both teams pretty much scored off of each other's mistakes. But Kansas State throwing that interception towards the end of the game was kind of what did it. And Kansas State just wasn't able to take it down the field. And they just weren't able to take it down the field and punch in the Hail Mary. It just wasn't able to happen. But kudos to Houston, man. Kudos to Houston. Houston, like, they literally just took a huge loss. Like, all right, you date back to their first conference game. They lose 34-0 against Cincinnati on the road. That is embarrassing. Come back home to play Iowa State, you lose 20-0. Hit the road and play TCU. You get a lot of turnovers by TCU, but you win 30-19 before you go on the road to Kansas and you lose 42-14. You come home and you beat a falling apart per usual Utah team, in which Utah actually had more yards of offense again. They just turned the ball over more. And then you finally get your big break in your big game of the year and you beat Kansas State. And want to know what's super funny is Houston now has a better record than Arizona. That is just kind of wild in my opinion. And they even have a better record than Oklahoma State, who is 0-6 in the conference and was 3-0 to start the year, ranked at like number 12. Texas A&M at South Carolina. I didn't want to call this one the upset because I felt like this one was just too screaming obvious of an upset to pick, like too easy to pick the upset here. So I took A&M, but maybe I should have taken. I didn't know they were gonna if this quarterback was gonna play or what. But maybe I should have taken South Carolina here, considering this Marcel Reed kid. He is a freshman, and he's hitting a hostile environment. He came into the LSU game, and he had all the Kyle Field momentum in his favor after, the first 2 touchdowns. It's kind of hard to stop a freshman in, that type of moment, the type of energy and momentum, the crowd of the team. It's kind of hard to stop a superstar like that, but once your quarterback hits a hostile environment and they have to perform at the same level, he wasn't able to do it, and he actually looked pretty bad. They also know how to approach your quarterback. He didn't really get much done on the floor like he did the last couple games. But South Carolina really started to stomp it in the second half, shutting out Texas A&M and killing them. Absolutely killing them. It was 20-20 going into halftime, and the second half, Texas A&M just wasn't able to get anything done offensively, and South Carolina finally gets their big win of the year. After losing a close one earlier in the year to LSU, they put the stomp down on Texas A&M. Louisville at Clemson. If there was any road game upset that I was thinking was most likely, it was this one. Because when you look at Clemson and who they've played since the Georgia loss, they haven't really played anybody, and they've been stomping easy opponents. Louisville, on the other hand, has played tough opponents, and all 3 of their losses are to respectable teams. And Louisville was looking for their big upset, their big game. The only reason I took Clemson here was because it was at their home stadium, and Clemson's home stadium, especially when they're good, can get pretty rowdy. But the fact that Cade Klubnik was even getting any Heisman talk is just ridiculous. I said Clemson would win a close offensive one. They lost a not close offensive one. Louisville just thrashed this team. I mean, you do got to kind of expect this when you've got Louisville barely losing on the road in a game they turned the ball over like 7 times against Notre Dame. They could have won that game on the road, and Notre Dame looks really good. They lose a game against SMU, who SMU is just trouncing opponents, and their only loss is to BYU, who's undefeated. And then they lose to Miami, who Miami is undefeated. And you look at who Louisville's lost to, and it's like, okay, you've lost to literally some of the best opponents in the country. SMU eventually will get into the top 10. Notre Dame is in the top 10. Miami is super in the top 10. They're in the top 5. Those are 3 of Louisville's losses, and all of them were 7-point games. Clemson, on the other hand, hasn't really played anybody. I'm pretty sure we could have expected Louisville to win this one. I should have expected Louisville to win this one, but sometimes home field is very, very important. Oh, I forgot to change it again. Gosh, I suck at my job. Gosh, I'm actually the worst, and I'm shitting and I'm puking. Louisville at Clemson. I was expecting a close defensive one, and it was a close defensive one. For some reason, Kentucky can just perform like this against high-level opponents. Tennessee's definitely they're definitely something. Their defense is pretty good, but they're scraping by. they're scraping by, and their loss to Arkansas looks worse and worse as the days go on. I mean, when you got Ole Miss and LSU absolutely killing them, it's like, well, in correlation, is Tennessee really going to compete that well with anybody else? Tennessee has to go at Georgia. I don't know, man. It's not looking too good for Tennessee the rest of the year. And our final game, Pitt at SMU. I'm happy I took SMU here. I saw some people taking Pitt. Again, another situation in which you see like Pitt hasn't really played anybody special. They've had to pull a lot of comeback games out of their ass, like that Cincinnati game. They were down big against Cincinnati, and Cincinnati should have won that game, but they blew it. West Virginia as well. West Virginia was up in that game. They should have won it, but they let Pitt come back, and they blew it. And Pitt also hasn't really played anybody else outside of that, and they've had a lot of close games. You finally go up against competition, and it's a road game, so you don't get the luxury of your home stadium, and you get absolutely pummeled. And some of these Pitt points are even fairy tale points, fart time comeback points, if you will. SMU is really, really good. Their win against Louisville looks better and better. Their 3-point competitive loss against BYU looks super good right now. And, yeah, I mean, that's all there is to it. SMU in the ACC championship. It's going to be Miami, SMU, and I could see SMU winning that, to be honest. I could see them winning that game. I'm not going to lie. But that's all for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Like and subscribe, have a comment. Always says that's all for me. Adios.